the London area, you will all recognize who our presenter is today. It's Chris Fraser, who is a dietitian, and she was the dietitian at Parkwood. Chris, you can correct me, but I think for about 30 or so.
25 years.
25 years. So Chris is going to do a presentation today on nutrition. I just want to let you all know that Chris has offered to share her PowerPoint. So either this week or next week, you will all get an email with Chris's PowerPoint. So if you want to follow along today, you know, that's great. And then, like I said, next week, you will get the presentation through email. So Chris, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself a bit more and start your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Julie and Liebna. So I don't want to take up too much time giving a little bit of my background. Julie did a fabulous introduction. My history with spinal cord injury and nutrition started 33 years ago when I sustained a spinal cord injury myself. T7, I was traveling and overseas when I had my accident. When I came back from where I was, I went to Parkwood Institute. It was called Parkwood Hospital at the time, where I did my rehabilitation inpatients and outpatients. I was already very interested in nutrition. I had finished my biology degree prior to my injury and was really motivated to go into the field. And from what I learned personally, and then as the years went by professionally, it became a real passion of mine. So I worked at Parkwood Institute here in London, Ontario, as the clinical dietitian for spinal cord injury and acquired brain injury for all those years. I loved being able to fulfill that role. And during that time, not only was the clinical dietitian for people in spinal cord and brain injury rehab at Parkwood, but had the opportunity to teach and be involved in various research studies as well. I think it helps too when somebody's coming from a lived experience. So I always see there's evidence-based practice, but then there's also practice-based evidence and what we know and learn as we go. And I'm hoping there'll be lots of great questions and comments and information sharing, because I think all of us who have injuries or not probably have a lot to contribute today. The reason why I wanted to make sure everybody had a copy of my PowerPoint is that there's a lot of information, B, a lot of food lists. And I'd rather people just listen today. This is probably a lot of it a review for you, but to sit and take notes and try to write down all the foods and everything that I'm saying, I don't want that to detract from what we're chatting about today. So I wanted to make sure you had the slides, you have the food lists, and we'll go from there. So Julie, how do I minimize this just so I can see my screen?
If you just do your share screen, Chris, it should just go right to your presentation.
Oh, right. Sorry.
At the bottom.
I'm not
That's
very
okay.
lucky, you guys. Thank you.
Okay.
All righty. So can everybody see the screen? Is it the way it should be, Julie?
Sorry, Chris. Yep, we can see.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
So I chose to call today's presentation Really Important Nutrition Considerations for People with Spinal Cord Injury. However, I could also have chosen the title as Really Important Nutrition Considerations for Everybody. I could also have called the presentation Nutrition Information to Decrease Inflammation in the Body. I could have called it Food and Mood. I could have called it What's Good for Your Brain is Good for Your Heart is Good for Your Gut, because all of the information that we're going to talk about today falls into all of those categories. And you're going to see a lot of overlap in foods that provide different functions in the body. And you'll also hear me say probably more than once, that's good for the brain is good for the heart, that's good for the gut, because the more we learn about nutrition, what we call the gut-brain axis is absolutely fascinating. So I will proceed. I don't know, why is my slide not changing, Juliet?
To the bottom left of your slide, if you hover over, do you see arrows?
They're there, Chris. You can just, they're really faint, but they're on the bottom left. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
thank you. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So March is Nutrition Month. Not everybody may know that. So I thought I would start off with kind of a cheesy slide about the 4 food groups. So food group number 1, good for you but tastes bad. Bad for you but tastes good. Makes you fat and ugly. Eat it and die. So probably not a fabulous way of promoting nutrition and Nutrition Month, but it's all funny. Foods are great. So the key topics for today: heart health and dietary fats, skin health, bowel health and management, bone health, vitamins and minerals. Well, that will be a theme throughout the conversation. And I've put together what I call our grocery list for health, the best anti-inflammatory and antioxidant foods, the best and most common ones that will play a valuable role in all aspects of our nutrition health. So strategies for heart health, obviously diet modifications, that's why we're here today. An increase in physical activity, noting though that we all have different levels of ability and disability and perhaps precautions and contraindications for what we may be able to do safely. So within your ability range and with the guidance of your physician or your physiotherapist, and management with medications may be required in addition to diet and exercise. And that would obviously be based on your annual blood work, your personal condition, your personal family history, your personal health history as well. So dietary fats, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I truly put these fats into these categories for a reason. Having said that, you know, we may hear about bad foods. There are no bad foods per se, but we certainly know that there are foods that we need to minimize intake in for reasons we'll be talking about. And then other foods that we definitely want to enhance in our diets for reasons we're going to be talking about as well. So the good fats contribute to heart and brain health and may decrease depression risk. And a lot of people may not realize that what we eat impacts not only our physical nutrition health, but also how we think and how we feel on so many levels. There's so much research going on right now into how our food impacts our feelings of anger, aggression, a sense of well-being, depression in terms of its intensity, depression in general, our mental health for sure, but even things like Alzheimer's disease and various dementias. And I have some information that will allude to that. We're actually starting to call it nutritional psychiatry. And it's fascinating. So more information to come, but the information we're talking about today absolutely addresses that as well. So going back to the good fats, don't worry about the terms monounsaturated, polyunsaturated. Those sort of refer to the chemical combinations and chemical structures of the fats. Just be aware of the foods. So within the good fats category, we have olive oil, canola oil, oil in walnuts, almonds, flax, and even peanuts, including peanut butter. We have fatty fish, like salmon, but we'll be talking about other types of fish that are high in the polyunsaturated and omega-3 fats. Ground flaxseed, oil in walnuts, soybeans, safflower, sunflower, canola, and corn oils. Some are better than others. All of these fats have protective qualities in certain areas. We'll talk about, though, which ones we want to focus on compared to keeping the other ones a little bit more minimal, and we'll talk about why that is. Omega-3 fats may decrease triglycerides. Triglycerides are a type of a fat in our bloodstream that can predispose us to cardiovascular disease, increased stroke risk, things like that. Omega-3 fats may prevent blood from clotting, which is why they can be helpful against decreasing our risk for stroke, as an example. Decrease in blood pressure, help manage symptoms of irritable and inflammatory bowel disorders. So once again, we're linking in, we've talked about the brain, the heart, and now we're also talking about the bowel, because what's good for the brain is good for the heart, which is good for the bowel, can help with depression, as we've alluded to. The best food sources of omega-3s are salmon, tuna, anchovies, sardines, herring, and mackerel, cold water fish. Cold water fish live in cold water. They need a little bit more fat to stay warm, and it's the omega-3 fats that are important for the properties that we're looking for. The next best sources of omega-3 fats are flaxseed oil, walnuts, supplements. So we also want to make note that for those of you who are on blood thinners, or those of you who may be sharing this information with a family member who has a condition that requires blood thinners, very important to proceed with caution. Like some of you may be saying, oh my gosh, I can't stand fish, or like, are you kidding me, anchovies? So you may say, well, you know, I'd like to pursue omega-3 fat supplements. I'm a very big supporter in supplements when used safely and in the right amounts for the right reasons. But I always do caution people that, because I don't know all of you and I don't know all of your situations, I just caution that if you're going to embark on any supplement, to make sure you run it by your doctor, even your pharmacist. Pharmacists are fabulous, fabulous resources for information. And if you typically use a certain pharmacy for your medications, that pharmacist can then say, if you say, I would like to start taking omega-3 supplements at X amount, a pharmacist can say, okay, let's see if there are any contraindications or precautions based on the medications you're on. Because a really big misconception for some people is that if they're taking supplements or herbs or other supplements that are out there, because they come from natural sources, it doesn't mean that they don't have side effects. There are many, many herbs out there that can cause a lot of trouble if we not just herbs, but supplements that can cause some issues for us that we don't want if we're not informed when we're using them. So the bad fats, remember, no food is bad per se. We just want to really take a review of what we're eating and see where we may be able to modify things to get the results that we're looking for. So bad fats increase risk for cardiovascular disease. They're the saturated fats, and significant intake in saturated fats. And the Western diet in particular, there's been a lot of research into the Western diet, meaning processed foods, fast foods, foods with a lot of saturated fat in them, and something else called trans fats, which I have on our next slide. A lot of like white flour, white sugar, baked goods, processed stuff, long shelf life. Those types of diets, when studied against another type of diet called the Mediterranean diet that we're going to be talking about today, have shown that increases, the Western diet increases feelings of anger, agitation, less ability to learn and focus and have a sense of well-being. So these next two slides, the bad fats and the trans fats, are things in our diets that we should be moderating. So saturated fats come from animal sources such as meat, poultry, lard, butter, dairy products that aren't low fat or fat-free. Saturated fats also come from non-animal sources. Those common ones are the tropical oils known as coconut oil, palm kernel oil, palm oil. When fats are left at room temperature, if they're liquid at room temperature, like oils, they're less saturated. When fats are left out on the counter at room temperature and they're solid at room temperature, that's a key that they're saturated. So if you have a bottle of coconut oil sitting on your counter, it says coconut oil, but it's going to be a solid, and therefore it's saturated. So the ugly fats, which I refer to trans fats as ugly fats, these increase risk for cardiovascular disease for many reasons. They also have the aspects to sort of our personality, our sense of well-being that we find in the Western diet as I was talking about. So trans fats are predominantly man-made as manufacturing of foods have changed. People want to have foods on their shelves that last an awfully long time. That's a benefit, it's a convenience, but it's also a downside in terms of the nutritional risk. So trans fats are found in things like French fries, potato chips, crackers, cookies, donuts, pastries, the convenience foods. If you're a label reader when you go to the grocery store, or if the person who does groceries for you is a label reader, and maybe you can convince that person, if he or she is not a label reader, just to take a look at labels. But also, if you don't tend to go to the grocery store yourselves, just take a look at some of the products in your refrigerator and on your shelves, and take a look at the list of ingredients. And if you see things that say shortening, hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated, you know that there are trans fats in that product. They also show up on the nutrition panel. But if you just want to read the list of ingredients, anywhere you see hydrogenated, you know that there are trans fats, which is predominantly a man-made fat that isn't good for us. Omega-6 fats. Now, this is important to note. So a number of the oils that showed on the good fat slide do contain omega-6, and they do have protective properties for our hearts and other aspects of our bodies. But omega-6s are really abundant in our food supply. So I can't take a show of hands right now, but I would like to take a show of hands to see, who does supplement with omega-3s and who may have a bottle in their cupboard that says omega-369. And during my role as the dietitian at Parkwood Institute, one of the things that I would do as part of a nutrition assessment is ask people what supplements they take, vitamins, minerals, omega-3 fats or 6-9s, herbs, protein powders, etc. And a lot of times people would say, oh, I take omega-3, 6-9. What I tell people is that because it's so easy to get omega-6s in our diet, you do not want to supplement omega-6 through taking a supplement. If you're going to supplement with omega-3 or an omega product, you want to focus on the omega-3s and then the food sources of omega-9s, and don't try to increase the sources of omega-6 in your diet. So if we just look here, omega-3 or omega-6s are found in corn oil, sunflower oil, the safflower oil. Those are all the ones we talked about in the good fats. They are, but you don't want to increase your intake. Don't supplement with omega-6 fats, as I mentioned. So you say, well, why is that? An imbalance in our omega-6s and omega-3s can actually increase in the inflammation in our bodies, and which is also linked to pain. People with spinal cord injuries and other conditions that may affect the nervous system tend to have a higher circulating level of inflammatory substances in our blood than somebody who hasn't had an illness or an injury. We sometimes know why, we sometimes don't. There have been studies looking at chronic pain in people with spinal cord injuries, and those who follow an anti-inflammatory diet had not only measurable decrease in these inflammatory substances in their blood, but self-reported decrease in chronic pain, and therefore an increase in quality of life because their pain was managed. And nutrition can play a role. So we don't want to throw the ratio of our fats out of whack by our eating and by our supplements. That's going to make inflammation worse and chronic pain worse. So we want to increase our intake of food sources of omega-3s, and a few slides ago, I listed the best sources of those. You'll be getting a copy of this presentation to see those foods, so you don't have to write them down. Focus to olive oil and olives. Not everybody likes olives, but olive oil we can incorporate into our diets very easily. Almonds, avocados, avocado oil, fabulous, more expensive, which is a consideration for a lot of people, but it's also a source of a really good fat. We want to achieve our anti-inflammatory benefits. And when we get towards the end of the slide presentation, where I have our grocery list for health, that's where the most common list of anti-inflammatory foods are found, which you'll have access to. So rules of thumb, as a reminder, good fats are liquid at room temperature, bad fats or less healthy fats are hard at room temperature. So when we talk about what we can do with our nutrition to improve heart health, I think people generally think that it's going to be what I have to eliminate from my diet. But there are a lot of things that we can incorporate into our diets that contribute to heart health, which will also contribute to brain health and to bowel health, because that's the way it works. So we're getting a triple whammy benefit. So other heart healthy foods are sources of soluble fiber. And when we talk about bowel management, we're going to talk about soluble fiber and another type of fiber as well. But for heart health, soluble fiber, things like oatmeal, oat bran, psyllium, flaxseed, lentils, legumes. Now, not everybody knows what a legume is. It's French for vegetable, I believe, and I think we have some French-speaking Canadians in the room today. But a legume, from a nutrition standpoint, are starchy beans or our beans. So like kidney beans, chickpeas, white beans that are found in like pork and beans or beans and tomato sauce, black beans, things like that. So that are very high in soluble fiber, also sources of protein. Barley, apples, strawberries, pears, citrus fruits, and other fruits and vegetables are heart healthy. We know that that type of fiber helps to grab on to the cholesterol and other components of our diet and carrying them out rather than them being absorbed into our bloodstream. Don't worry about the term sterols, phytosterols, but just know that the good vegetable oils, nuts, seeds, legumes, especially soybeans, are also heart healthy. Carotenoids, tomato products, red and orange vegetables, watermelon, pink grapefruit, guava, the bright colored fruits and vegetables are packed with things that are healthy for our bodies in ways that we know and ways that still remain to be seen. When I've talked to patients and clients in the past throughout my entire career, I've always said vegetables are magic. And some people look at me funny and I go, no, like vegetables are really magic. And I will say that today because they truly, truly are. Green and black teas, onions, broccoli, food sources of some of our B vitamins, leafy greens, fruits, legumes, lentils, nuts, wheat germ. You'll see a lot of overlap in types of foods that we really want to incorporate into our diets. Soy milk, tofu, soy flour, roasted soy nuts. There's a little caveat to that, is that soy can be potentially not beneficial for somebody who has had breast cancer or has a family history of breast cancer. So I will defer to people's physicians. If you are wanting to significantly crank up your soy intake, definitely talk to a doctor prior to doing that. But you can see that there's so many other foods that we can incorporate into our diets if they're not already in there, that it doesn't have to be soy. And incorporating more meatless meals into our diet as well. So what do? Replace the bad fats or not so good fats in our diets with the good fats. Consume other heart healthy foods daily. Attempt to maintain a healthy body weight. It's harder when we're seated most of the time or all of the time. but to do our best through the foods we choose and within the extent that we can move our bodies. And as I mentioned previously, you know, talking to your doctor, your physical therapist, if you're wanting to increase your physical activity. Ask your doctor to do a blood test minimum yearly, which includes total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, triglycerides, and the ratio. And when I've spoken with younger patients over the years, sometimes the physicians will say, well, you know, you're young, like you're 23 or you're 18 or you're whatever, you know, we don't need to start looking at your lipid levels yet. But when somebody sustains a spinal cord injury, they're automatically at higher risk for cardiovascular disease. And I say that to empower, not to place any fear. So when we can know our numbers and have a really good checkup of our blood work, at least yearly, I think it just helps for peace of mind or to guide where changes may need to happen. Key components of the Mediterranean diet. Many of you may have heard about the Mediterranean diet. Every single day includes vegetables, fruits, whole grains, olive oil, legumes like the beans we just talked about, nuts, seeds, low-fat dairy, herbs and spices, plus fish and seafood at least 2 times a week. So if you enjoy fish and seafood, try to incorporate it at least 2 times a week. You could even open a can of salmon, a can of tuna. You don't have to be doing anything fancy on the grill, filleting your own fish or anything like that. Poultry and eggs a few times a week. Red meat no more than a few times a month. Lean portions, smaller portions than some of us may choose. Incorporating occasional meatless meals and sweets occasionally. I say sweets occasionally because sugar is a known inflammatory. So when I mentioned earlier about like white sugar, white flour, highly processed foods, it makes something that could be very healthy into something that can cause inflammation in our bodies. So if you have a lot of sweets, candies, chocolate bars, if you incorporate a lot of those things, pastries, the high sugar foods in your diet, I would say that if you're wanting to make changes to your diet, that would be a good place to start. I also want to say that it would be totally overwhelming to change your entire diet. If you're looking at what we're talking about today and listening and say, oh, I have to change everything. I'm motivated to change, but I'm overwhelmed if I have to change everything all at once. Absolutely not. Take a look at your diet or think about your diet during the presentation and after and say, where do I think I can get the quickest, what is the quickest, most easy thing that I can do with my diet to start? And then slowly make changes as we go. I think that's really important to note. But sugar causes inflammation. So this is the Mediterranean diet pyramid. It's basically what I just said. With the meats and sweets less often, other really good foods that are in there. The mind diet, I wanted to include this, and it alludes to something I just mentioned a second ago about feeling that if you can't change everything, then some small changes are going to give you good results. So the MIND diet stands for the Mediterranean Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. So that's why we call it the MIND diet. It's been shown to reduce the likelihood of developing Alzheimer's by 53% of the people who followed the diet rigorously, but 35% of the people got results who didn't follow it rigorously. And this is what the MIND diet includes. It's not horrendous when you think about it. Includes at least 6 servings per week of leafy vegetables. Should be doable. At least 1 serving per day of other vegetables. Not potatoes, not corn. Sorry, potato corn people. So many times throughout my career, when I would be taking people's diet histories to guide education, etc., the only vegetables that some people eat are potatoes and corn. if that's you, choose a vegetable you want to try, and then try to increase the vegetables that you learn to enjoy, because vegetables are magic. They really, really are. So at least 1 serving per day of other vegetables, at least 2 servings of berries per week, at least 5 servings of nuts per week. And that doesn't mean sitting down to a can of cashews. Just a handful, like even like 15 almonds is considered, there or thereabouts, is considered a serving. And there's a lot of good in those 15 almonds. Excuse me, whole grains per day, at least 4 servings per week of the legumes, the beans, at least 1 serving of fish per week, and at least 2 servings of poultry per week. So it's not crazy. It's not some crazy way out there diet. It's just guiding us to what to try to start to incorporate into our diets as we can. Pressure ulcers and spinal cord injury. This is a big topic. And I want to address it today just in general. So hopefully for those of us out there, those of you out there, if you've had a spinal cord injury as a result of an illness or injury, or you have another condition that results in you needing to spend a lot of time sitting or lying, hopefully you've had education around relieving the pressure, because a pressure ulcer truly is the result of unrelieved pressure of your bum, your hips, your heels, your elbows, whatever part of your body has too much pressure on for too long. What happens is that cuts off the blood flow. If blood isn't getting to a certain area of our bodies, we're not getting oxygen to that tissue. We're not getting fluid to that tissue, and we need fluid and hydration to maintain healthy tissue. We're not getting vitamins and minerals to that tissue that flows through our bloodstream. So we're basically starving the tissue that we're sitting on if we're not relieving the pressure of nutrition, hydration, and oxygen. So relieve the pressure as often as you can, however you can do that. Certainly a bad transfer, we bump our butt on our wheel or on the commode, or getting in and out of our vehicles. You know, we do many transfers in the course of a day, either independently or with assistance. Really important to check our skin on our own if we can. Getting help, certainly if we need help to do it, it's really important. But we're talking about nutrition today. So optimal nutrition and hydration is absolutely essential to prevent wounds, but to heal them if they do occur. So the focus is protein, vitamins, minerals, and fluid. Water ideally, but hydration, however we can hydrate ourselves, that's not full of sugar, because sugar is inflammatory. So protein comes from our animal sources. So from like beef and pork and poultry and lamb and dairy products and eggs and cheese and yogurt. But there's also non-animal sources of protein. So the legumes, probably the biggest non-animal source of protein. So our beans, our lentils, our barley, our whole grains. Some of our vegetables are higher in protein than in others. So there are a lot of sources in our diets to get protein. Fruits don't have protein in them. If avocado is considered a fruit, and I'm not sure if it's a fruit or a vegetable, but anyways, there is some protein in avocados, also great source of healthy fat. And keeping our hydration up. And I know as a wheelchair user for 33 years, with the state of accessibility in our community, that sometimes it's hard to stay hydrated if we're afraid of not being able to find a bathroom or not having a transfer that's safe or whatever. But when and where we can stay optimally hydrated for our brains, for our hearts, for our bowels, for our skin, for our urinary tracts, for sure. Other strategies for skin health. Excellent blood sugar control is necessary for wound healing and for prevention of skin breakdown, urinary tract infections, and everything else. I mentioned blood sugar because when somebody's had a traumatic spinal cord injury, especially, it predisposes that person, myself included, to develop diabetes at some point in our lives. So getting our blood sugars checked by our family doctors when they're checking our cholesterol, really important. And if we need to be aware of our blood sugar control for health going forward. And if we're prone to respiratory infections, urinary tract infections, having blood sugars that aren't in normal or very well controlled range will make it easier to contract infections and harder to get rid of them. And it definitely makes it harder to heal a pressure ulcer once it's developed. Self-supplementing with protein and vitamins and minerals, I've mentioned, you really want to get some guidance on supplementation based on your specific situation. An example is if somebody's kidneys aren't working 100% for whatever reason, increasing protein intake might not be as safe for somebody whose kidneys don't function 100% as it is for somebody whose kidneys function well. So nutrients are really, really healthy and necessary, but depending on individual conditions, we may need to be more cautious. Just one last thing about skin, that we know that skin healed in the absence of optimal nutrition is more prone to break down again. Anybody who's ever had a pressure ulcer or skin breakdown knows that it's really challenging to heal and it really throws off your daily routine. So try to prevent it from happening. And if you do get a pressure ulcer or have one now, and you're focusing on nutrition, work so hard on your nutrition, because when you heal that wound with optimal nutrition, then your skin is more likely to stay closed. And an analogy that I use is, there can be a pothole in the road out in front of your house. And if we fill the pothole with sawdust and duct tape, the hole's closed. But the chances of that hole staying closed because we've used sawdust and duct tape to close it up, it's going to open up way more than if we used like the right materials, cement or whatever. I'm not a road guy, so I'm not exactly sure, guy or girl. So really make sure that you heal your skin with optimal nutrition. Bowel management and spinal cord injury. Challenges with bowel management are related to neurological changes. If you've had a neurological illness or injury, lack of voluntary control, if your situation has led to you not being able to consciously control when you're going to move your bowels or not. Diet and lifestyle changes, so huge. Inadequate hydration can completely lead to constipation and bigger problems resulting from constipation if that continues. And sometimes bowel medications and other things may be necessary or helpful for our bowel care programs. So a successful bowel care program empties the bowel at a predictable time, regularly and completely, prevents incontinence and the health complications of incontinence that can be skin breakdown, if we're not keeping our skin clean and dry as much as we possibly can. And a bowel care program has to be customized. Like my level of injury is T7 complete. I could be sitting beside Joe Blow, who has an injury of T7 complete, but what works for his bowel management could be completely separate from or different than what works for mine. So that's where I wanted you to have the food list and know what different fibers do different things in our bodies and why. So nutrition management of neurogenic bowel. Neurogenic bowel is just a bowel that has changed because of some neurological condition, whether it be injury or illness. So the nutrition management of neurogenic bowel is individualized. Optimal nutrition and hydration, especially in certain areas that we're going to be talked about, and carefully chosen bowel medications if you require them or if you think you do. It's important to get the right information, because just like not all fiber is not all fiber is created equal, not all bowel medications are created equal, and they can do different things, and they may do things that we don't want them to do. So important to note. So what do? We must eat the right combination of soluble and insoluble fiber. And I'm going to show you again, we've talked a bit about soluble fiber for heart health. I'm going to show you the food list again for soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. We want a combination. And if we're eating plant foods, all plant foods have fiber in them to a greater or lesser degree. Most of those plant foods contain both soluble and insoluble fiber, but some foods contain more soluble fiber or more insoluble fiber than others. And that's where my lists come in. And they do different things in the body. And then this is why it's really important, whether you have an injury or illness, or you're completely able-bodied but you have problems with your bowels, because it's universal. So this information is really important. Another real important point to note is that if your diet is low in fiber and you want to, after today, or you've been doing reading, you want to increase the fiber in your diet, you don't want to do it all at once, because you might go, holy moly, I'm never going to touch fiber again as long as I live. So you want to choose your fibers correctly, carefully, and then you want to slowly introduce fiber into your diets. Insoluble fiber, this is the type of fiber that really creates form and bulk in our stool. And it can speed the passage of food through our stomach and intestines. So some people that I've talked to over the years, they might sit on the john for 2 hours waiting for their bowels to move during their bowel care program. That's a lot of time. And, certainly our bowels do change over time after our spinal cord injuries, but there's lots we can do to keep them working as optimally as possible. So if you find you're spending a lot of time trying to get your bowels to move, introduce more insoluble fiber into your diets. The list of foods is coming up. Slowly but surely do that. And it's important to drink optimal fluids in general, of course, but as we're increasing fiber into our diets, we need to have the fluid that will absorb into the fiber that we're putting in to form the bulk and create the movement in our bodies for our bowels to move. So the food sources of insoluble fiber, the key ones: whole grain wheat, think wheat bran, which is different from oat bran, which is soluble. So I always say, if you're thinking insoluble fiber, think wheat bran. Rye, pumpernickel, corn bran, other grains, brown rice and pasta, plums, strawberries. You can see, in the interest of time, I won't read every food on every slide, and you will be getting these. So there's also soluble fiber in these foods, but these are the predominantly insoluble fiber foods that are going to form bulk and hopefully result in you spending less time in the bathroom. Soluble fiber, this type of fiber produces a softer stool. So if your issue is a very hard stool, then you definitely want to increase your fluid. That could be the big key right there. But in order to naturally get a softer stool, it's the soluble fiber that you want. If you are having diarrhea, if there's anybody in your household that's listening to this and go, holy moly, too much information. It is not too much information. This is information that we need, or a lot of us may. If you have diarrhea, first of all, if it's all the time, you need to get that checked out, because that's not normal or natural. You need to find out why that is. But adding soluble fiber into your diet while you have diarrhea will act as a sponge and slow then things down and absorb the water and start to get some form back to your stool. So I just wanted to throw that in as an aside. We talked in the heart health section that soluble fiber may help to lower cholesterol and reduce blood sugar. In fact, I'd forgotten to mention that soluble fiber, in addition to decreasing cholesterol in our bloodstream, can also help to reduce our blood sugars. This type of fiber is more likely to produce gas and bloating and cramps, so introduce it slowly. When I went all out one time thinking, I got to get more legumes into my diet. So sometimes, I get over enthusiastic about things. Not a good idea to significantly ramp up beans in your diet if you're not used to a lot of beans and legumes. So do it slowly, but it's important to have some in your diet for sure. So the soluble fiber foods, the oats, oatmeal, oat bran, and then you see some of the other foods as well. Once again, I don't want to read everything. You can see it there and you'll have that. But these are the foods that you should be concentrating on if you have a bout of diarrhea, but also if you have a hard stool, increase your fluids. Just a quick chat about Metamucil. I'm not a physician and I'm not a pharmacist, but through my clinical experience for 25 years, when we were working on patients either newly injured with spinal cord injuries or have come back in after a number of years because something has arisen, and we're doing a full review, that people with lower level of injuries, and generally, like say very low thoracic T or lumbar L, people who tend to have lower level of injuries might need to have a bulkier stool than those who have higher level of injuries. There's less tone in their bowel, so they need more bulk. We find that adding Metamucil slowly, in addition to working with the proper types of fibers and food containing fiber, can be helpful in that situation. So I just want to throw that out there, and that might be something you want to think about or talk to your doctor about if you feel that that scenario applies to you. Other things that we can do for our bowel health. Early on, I talked about the brain-gut axis, or the gut-brain axis. And what we know and what we're learning more and more about is about probiotics that are in our guts. Everybody has bacteria in their gut. Some are better than others. Some promote health and some promote ill health, disease, not feeling well, etc. So we want to make sure that we're eating a diet that contains what we call prebiotics. So prebiotics are the things in certain foods that feed the good bacteria in our guts, so that the good bacteria can start taking over the bad bacteria. And probiotics and bacteria in our guts can promote inflammation in our bodies or decrease inflammation in our bodies. So it's really important to note that. Omega-3 fats also can be helpful for bowel health. Physical activity within your personal limitations can help the bowels move faster. And abdominal massage. I don't know if anybody's ever tried this, but I'll do this when I'm lying in bed reading a book or whatever, is just massage my abdomen, just slowly and gently, it just to help things move through. Some people find that is helpful. Limiting high fat foods, and especially when we talk fat, and now you know that there's fats that are better or not. So we want to choose our fats wisely in terms of the quality of the fats. But in general, fat is the last thing to leave our stomachs during digestion and can slow things down. So just bear that in mind. Ensuring optimal hydration. I can't impress upon you the importance of hydration for everything. And as I mentioned, you may need bowel medications, but getting guidance in terms of the best ones that may work for you in the right way. Osteoporosis and spinal cord injury. I would say that this is maybe one of the bigger challenges right now for researchers and people who have spinal cord injuries or who don't weight bear, because it's the weight bearing and the active pulling of the muscle on the bone that really keeps our bones strong. So if we don't have that, or if that's been impaired in some way, completely or partially, our bone health may suffer as a result. So what can we do with our diets about that? And certainly there are medications out there. There are new ones. I can't speak to that, but definitely talk to your doctors if that's something you're interested in, if you haven't pursued that already. So people with spinal cord injuries have a greater risk for developing vitamin D deficiency. We don't really know why that is, but it is the case. And vitamin D is needed for calcium absorption. So what we found that, some people might be trying to eat more and more and more calcium for their bone health, or eating more and more foods that contain calcium for their bone health, or taking large amounts of calcium supplements that can actually be detrimental. People can decrease and sometimes get off calcium supplements if they start supplementing with vitamin D, because vitamin D will help the body absorb calcium from food and supplement sources really efficiently. So it's really the vitamin D that you need, the calcium in your diets, potentially by supplement, depending on what you've been guided to do. But the vitamin D is absolutely essential for optimal absorption of the calcium that we're consuming. The key food sources of calcium, probably just a review for everybody: milk, cheese, yogurt, canned salmon with bones. I personally pick the bones out of my canned salmon just because I don't like the feel of it, but it's a really good source of calcium. Fortified beverages, so there's orange juice out there now that has calcium in it, things like that. Key food sources of vitamin D: fluid milk. Milk doesn't naturally contain vitamin D. Way back when Canada started adding vitamin D into the milk supply, because everybody drank milk back in the day. And so we wanted to get vitamin D into a source that was easily accessible for people. So kids back then didn't get rickets and older people didn't get osteoporosis. So fluid milk, fatty fish, and fortified margarine. So go, wow, some of the other food lists had extensive numbers of food, but it's hard to get vitamin D in our diets. It really, really is. And even people who are milk drinkers don't always get all that they need. We know that exposing skin to sun without sunscreen will result in the production of vitamin D within our bodies. But we live in North America and we don't have sun all the time, and we've been told to use sunscreen. So vitamin D is a supplement that I support the use of quite a bit, but everybody's individual. So it's hard for me in a platform like today to give really specifics for everyone. For bone health, we want to limit caffeine, alcohol, colas, and smoking, because in people able-bodied or not, these things can negatively impact bone health. Consuming other nutrients contained in fruits and vegetables, leafy greens, whole grains, and nuts are bone healthy. Vitamin D supplement, and trying to get your vitamin D level assessed by your family physician. Some will and some won't. I'm a huge supporter of people knowing their vitamin D levels. It's 25 hydroxy vitamin D. For those of you who have spinal cord injuries or other neurological injuries, or can't or are limited in your weight bearing, that puts us into a higher risk category, which means that the doctors can check off the test that will not cost us anything. If somebody else who doesn't have any risk factors is just curious, it costs them, I don't know, $30 or something. But we have risk factors, so it doesn't cost us to get the test done. Vitamin B12. People with spinal cord injury may be more likely to develop vitamin B12 deficiency. Once again, don't really know why. Ask your doctor to check your vitamin B12 yearly, because we don't want to end up with a vitamin B12 deficiency, a vitamin B12 deficiency anemia. Vitamin B12 is essential for production of blood cells, essential for the health of our nervous systems. The key food sources, and always bottom line, is try to increase the nutrients we're talking about through food sources first, supplements if necessary, but really educate yourselves and talk to professionals before you supplement, especially in large amounts. So the key food sources of vitamin B12: meat, poultry, fish, shellfish, organ meats, milk, fortified cereals, and fortified soy products. When I say fortified, I mean nutrients that have been put into a food that don't usually contain them. It's kind of been added, or the nutrient is already in a food, but they're adding more. Vitamin mineral supplementation. If some is good, more is not necessarily better and may cause harm. Attempt to get your nutrition from whole foods. The less processed a food is, the better it's going to be for us. And talk to your doctor, dietitian, pharmacist before self-supplementing. So this, I'm just taking a peek at the time. Oh my gosh, it's almost 4:30. I won't read out every food, but these foods, as a reminder, are the foods that I've put together based on, you know, research, things that we've known, things that we're coming to know, research on anti-inflammatory diets, research on foods and inflammation and antioxidants and all of that. So this is what I call your grocery list for health. So this is the foods that I've chosen to put, again, are more common foods. They're available to us. And at the end of the slide presentation, which we may not get to, I've put in budget-friendly grocery lists, because budgets are important for all of us. We don't all have, you know, won the $1,000 a day for life lottery or whatever. So we have to be careful where we put our food dollar. And so I've given some tips and tricks at the end that you'll all be getting sent out to you to save money in the grocery store. So this is the fruits list. There's a vegetable list, nuts and seeds, legumes, the grains, going for whole grain wherever possible. So important. Herbs and spices, other heart healthy items for your grocery cart. Protein foods. We've talked about protein, not only in terms of, you know, skin health, but other things. These are the ones to choose. And now here we have the healthy eating on a budget, and I'll show that there's just things there. Oops. Can you still see me?
We can see you, but not your presentation.
Oh, okay. That was actually at the end. I thought I had a catchy little cartoon at the end there, so I was flipping to find it. But that is the presentation. I don't know if there were any questions that were generated, or questions, concerns, rebuttals, but if we have time, I'm happy to take people's questions.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you, Chris. I just want to say thank you too for sharing your presentation, because there is so much good information on there that, you know, it's going to be nice that people can refer back to. Okay, so I'll quickly go through the chat because there was a few questions. You say to consume sweets and sugar occasionally, but what exactly is considered occasional?
Oh, that's a good question. It's like the moderation word, occasional moderation. Based on what we know about sugar and what it does in our bodies, how it can impact negatively our moods and all kinds of things, and trying to eliminate them as much as possible is ideal, but that's not necessarily possible or even desired. I love my chocolate. So what's occasional? It wouldn't be every day. If you're eating large amounts every day, I would say set your goal at eating smaller amounts every day. And then if you feel comfortable with that and you don't feel overly deprived, then try to skip a day where you're not taking any sweets until you're down to, you know, a couple of days a week maybe, but not large portions, if that's possible. Another aside to that is not an aside, but an addition to the sugar conversation is when we look at a graph of our blood sugars, if we were to eat, say, I don't know, a piece of candy, and then we track our blood sugar, it goes up high fast and it crashes fast. We also know that if we were to look at a chemical in our brain called serotonin, that it's the feeling good brain chemical, that serotonin can go up kind of like blood sugar. So people who feel the need for sweets on a regular basis, they'll grab a sweet, they'll get this rush of sugar, rush of serotonin, but there'll be a crash. To overcome the crash, let's say, oh, I have to grab a donut or a couple cookies, but then it becomes a vicious circle in our peaks and valleys of blood sugar and serotonin. So if we choose other sources of carbohydrate, because sugar is carbohydrate, but it's just very processed. So if we can choose something that still contains carbohydrate, but with also some food benefit to it. Like multigrain toast and put a little bit of peanut butter on it, you're going to get the carb, you're going to get a slower rise, and therefore you won't get a crash. It will be an evened out course. And then your sense of well-being and your mood will stay more even throughout the day. And I'm not saying if you're eating a lot of sugar, it's for mood, it's because it tastes good too, but everything interconnects. So that's sort of answering the question, but sort of expanding on something I didn't touch on in the presentation. Oh, I can't hear you anymore, Julie.
Because I was on mute. Thanks, Chris. Do you recommend using a glucometer at home for tracking blood sugar, even if we are not diabetic?
No. See, so no. I think that, okay, how do I answer this? Because I love knowing numbers, and sometimes I get caught up in numbers. And anybody in the audience who had been one of my patients over the years knew that I was assessing for things a lot in addition to diet quality. First of all, glucometers are free, but you can only get them with a prescription of test strips, and test strips are very expensive. So unless you have one, the $1,000 a day for life or whatever, it would be very expensive to monitor your blood sugars without being diabetic at all. I think that if you have a family history of diabetes, you should be having your blood sugars checked by your family physician. If you have a spinal cord injury or illness or neurological condition, you should be having your blood sugars checked more often by your family physician. Absolutely. Because you're at higher risk for developing diabetes, definitely. I would say at that point, if you're diagnosed with pre-diabetes or diabetes, that's when you want to start checking your blood sugars. Somebody sitting out there, or perhaps a colleague out there would say, we don't recommend people checking their blood sugars when they just have pre-diabetes. That people should be working on lifestyle, physical activity to the extent that they can, dietary choices, weight loss if needed. And the majority of people who get type 2 diabetes, which tends to happen later in life, is very, very closely associated with carrying extra weight. So to answer your question, no. Do I personally recommend getting a glucometer and checking your blood sugars and you're not diabetic? I absolutely don't. Having your blood sugars monitored on a regular basis, regular is different based on your circumstances, but you'd have to know your numbers. Absolutely, you have to know your numbers, your cholesterol levels, your blood sugars, vitamin D, vitamin B12, markers, that would reflect anemia. For people with spinal cord injury, have your thyroid levels checked, because that can be linked to injuries, and diabetes and hypothyroidism can be linked. So being assessed by your physician for sure.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'm going to sort of put the next two questions together because they're similar. So one is, there a recommended dosage for vitamin D for people with spinal cord injuries, and is too much vitamin D a bad thing?
Excellent questions. So generally speaking, and note that this is for the general population, my clinical practice, my personal experience as somebody living with a spinal cord injury, and not knowing everybody's individual circumstance. Generally speaking, I recommend 2,000 units of vitamin D a day. I personally sometimes will take more, like Julie and I were chatting last week, and say, if I'm shaking vitamin D into my hand or into the bottle cap or whatever, if an extra one falls out, I'm not concerned about that. Where people can really run into problems with vitamin D supplementation is above 10,000 units a day. There are a number of potential drawbacks to that. I think 2,000 units a day definitely will meet people's needs. In some cases, it might not allow your vitamin D level to be up to minimum level of the normal range, but you wouldn't know that until you had your vitamin D level checked. But generally speaking, 2,000 units of vitamin D is fine. Some people ask me, well, should I only take it during the winter months when we don't have a lot of sun? I take it year round. And also, if you're taking vitamin D supplement and then sun tanning in the middle of the summer without sunscreen, the amount that your body is going to produce will never get up to a toxic level. Our bodies are very, very intelligent. So, but supplementing with nutrients, any nutrients, even if they're generally safe, can get into toxic levels and cause problems.
Okay. Is too much B12 a bad thing? I was told by my doctor my B12 levels were too high. Sorry, I thought I was on mute again. Were too high and to stop taking them. I might have asked why, but forgot. Basically asking, can you tell me what is wrong with high B12 levels?
So vitamin B12 is one of those nutrients that tend to be very, very safe to take. I obviously don't know how much the person asking this question is taking. I don't know if they can maybe type in how much they're taking while I'm answering, but I don't know how much you're taking or why, and I don't know how high your level was. Sometimes when there's a very, very high vitamin B12 level, it may be reflective of something potentially concerning that you'd want to have that conversation with your doctor about. Rarely it would be something concerning, but sometimes it could be. So that would probably be another good conversation to have with the doctor. How high is my level? And based on my level, should we be investigating something? Or now that you know that your level is high, your doctor suggested that you stop taking it or back off, give it a period of time and have your B12 level reassessed.
Okay. What is your view on the use of low carb diets for glucose management?
So there's low carb and then there's low carb. So generally speaking, so if somebody's been diagnosed with prediabetes or diabetes, obviously carbohydrate intake has to be a really big focal point of your diet. Keeping in mind though, that glucose that comes from carbs is our brain's preferred source of energy and is the only source of energy that's available to our brains unless we're in a crisis situation, at which point something called ketones can then power our brains, but it's not a normal fuel for the brain. So looking at what carbs you're taking, how much you're taking during the day, and how they're being distributed throughout the day is really important. So that's generally speaking, but there's been a lot in the media over the last handful of years of lower carbohydrate diets. And the lowest one likely is the keto diet. You may have heard about the keto diet, where it's not completely carbohydrate free, but it's so low. It puts your body biochemically into the state of an uncontrolled type 1 diabetic, where there would be rapid weight loss and all kinds of changes, which is one of the reasons the keto diet is so popular, is that the weight loss as a result of the keto diet is very, very rapid. And it's using fuel for the body and the brain differently than under, a more what we'd call balanced diet. Having said that, the keto diet and research into the keto diet and other very low carb diets have shown beneficial effects to blood sugar control, for sure. But those types of diets, because they're higher in fat, and people who are on the keto diet may have the option of choosing healthy fats, but don't always, because there's such a focus on carb, is that research is showing in the very, very low carb diets that have more fat, more protein perhaps, is putting people's heart health more at risk. So, so definitely we can get better blood sugar control by keeping carbs low, but the low carb diets and the keto diet, we don't have enough data yet and research knowledge about the long-term potential downsides of them. Having said that, there may be wonderful long-term potential upsides. We don't know that, but it just puts our bodies into different biochemistry, which is why I'm cautionary. They're also very, very hard diets to stick with. And as you could see throughout my presentation, vegetables need to be incorporated into the diet. Vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and in the very low carb diets, the nutrients from those really valuable food groups are really, really low because they're hard to get in a low carb diet.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Is 11 grams of sugar in my yogurt too much? Too much sugar?
Sorry, just had to swig some water. So that's an excellent question because sugar is so important to be aware of in our foods. So if I was just thinking, 11 grams of sugar in a yogurt, that's sort of looking at it absolutely. You sort of want to look at it in terms of basically your diet, like your full diet. So if you don't have a lot of sugar in your diet, generally speaking, and you have a yogurt that has 11 grams of sugar, then that would be absolutely fine. But when you take a look at your overall diet and you're finding that there's a lot of sugar in a lot of items that you're choosing, then that can be a problem in terms of blood sugar control, if that's an issue for you, weight management, if that's an issue for you, inflammation, chronic pain, if that's an issue for you. But inflammation should be an issue everybody's aware of. So it's hard to say in that yogurt because I don't know what the rest of your diet looks like.
Okay. What are some natural combinations of ingredients to treat and to prevent UTIs?
Wow. So thinking of the diet. So once again, we're talking fruits and vegetables predominantly. There's a fabulous professional researcher out there called Dr. Julie Conquer, Conquer. And I've had the opportunity to see her speak on a couple of occasions and meet her. And one of the areas in which she does research is urinary tract health. And, if you reflect back to a number of slides ago, when we were chatting, I talked about the sterols, the phytosterols, the phytochemicals, things like that. These are things that are different from vitamins and minerals. They're components of things that are in fruits and vegetables that are so important in so many ways, including the urinary tract. So, we hear about cranberry, but even like apples and aspects of grapes and other types of the fruits and vegetables, the brightly colored fruits and vegetables contain components that are healthy for our bladders. And having been involved in some research about urinary tract infections and cranberry many years ago, and then speaking with Dr. Julie Conquer and reading some of her research, we know that the components of, let's just say cranberry or apple as an example, it doesn't kill the bacteria that causes urinary tract infections, but it helps to prevent the bacteria from adhering to the bladder wall, because that's what we really, really, really don't want, is that there's always going to be bacteria. Even if, those of us who don't have injuries, don't use catheters, whatever, there's always some bacteria in the urinary tract. But those of us who catheterize, whether, an indwelling or intermittent or whatever, there's always more chance for bacteria to get into our bladder. So what we want to do is make sure that we're eating a really, really good diet that keeps the bacteria from glomming onto the bladder wall. Optimal hydration. Water is a nutrient. People don't always think that. helps to flush things through. When we talk about sugar, bacteria loves sugar. So would I recommend cranberry juice that when you look at the label, the first ingredient is sugar or glucose, fructose or whatever? Absolutely not, because bacteria love sugar. So in my opinion, the sugar in that particular juice is kind of negating the value of the cranberry. So trying to get, and so when I've gotten like the raw cranberry juice or the unsweetened, holy moly, it's horrendous in my opinion, but I water it down to get that nutrient in without getting the sugar. And the last thing that has nothing to do with nutrition, but personal experience and clinical experience working in healthcare, is that if we let our bladders get over full, we're totally predisposing ourselves to bladder infections. So we've got our bladder wall, and there's this, what we call like a biofilm around our bladder wall. And sometimes the bacteria can get into that biofilm and behind the biofilm and linger there and not cause any trouble. But if our bladders get overfilled, it sort of stretches that biofilm, liberating the bacteria. And then that's when we can get real big whammy bladder infections. Take care of your bladders. Don't let them get overfilled. Drink water, put fruit and vegetables into your diet because they contain things that keep bacteria from glomming onto our bladders.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so the last two questions in our chat are your thoughts. What are your thoughts on intermittent fasting?
So that's another type of diet or I guess nutrition strategy that's out there and people are talking about. I don't know enough about it to go into a whole lot of detail. I think what's really important in any scenario with nutrition when people are trying to decide what works for them or what might work for them, or they're wanting to lose weight, or they have whatever nutrition goals, that at the end of the day, like literally at the end of the day, you've gotten all of the vitamins, minerals, protein, micronutrients, the good fats, the good sources of carbohydrate to keep you healthy, to keep your brains working, to keep your moods from swinging, to keep your skin intact. So if you can change up the schedule of your day, like intermittent fasting, and it works for you, but you're still able to maintain your skin health, your brain health, your heart health, your bowel health, and get all the nutrients you need for health, I'll hazard a guess that potentially the schedule is not as important as getting all of your nutrition. One thing we do know though, that if a lot of hours go by between a meal or a snack or 2 meals or whatever, that our metabolic rates slow down because the body's main focus is survival, and our bodies are really intelligent. And if we look at the things that burn calories off throughout the day, if weight management is somebody's goal, that our metabolic rates burn 70% of our calories in the course of a day, way more than physical activity, way more than other processes that go on in our bodies, to keep us alive and stuff. So if we're consistently decreasing our metabolic rates, it's going to be harder to burn calories over time because our bodies are going to want to hold on to the calories, wondering when the next snack or meal is coming. So I'll toss that out. Just quickly going back to urinary health, we've talked about pre and probiotics. There's all kinds of probiotics out there, and different probiotics do different things. And there are probiotics that exist that are specific for urinary tract health. I don't know the particular names of those strains because it's all based on strains of probiotics, of good bacteria. But for those of you who struggle significantly with urinary tract infection, you might want to ask about probiotics. that are targeted for urinary tract health.
Okay, so we've got one last question. Actually, it's about the bladder. What is a reasonable range of bladder volumes that are good for the bladder health? Higher or lower than 400 milliliters on average?
I would keep it 4 or lower. 4 or lower, and everybody's bladder's different. You know, some of my able-bodied friends, you know, I joke and I say, you know, like, you must have the smallest bladder in the world because, like, you have to go to the bathroom every 10 minutes. So everybody's natural bladder capacity is going to be variable. But when we're talking about a neurogenic bladder per se, you know, something that's been impacted by a neurological condition, 400, I would say, would be max. I would try to keep it below that. Some people might not be able to sustain that high a volume without having some kind of incontinence or, you know, breakthrough if you're wearing a Foley catheter or something. But in terms of bladder expansion, I know, like at Parkwood Institute in the spinal cord rehab program, like we would try to teach people like 3 or 350 mils, not going much higher than that.
Okay. And another last question from the chat box. What is the volume of fluids we should be consuming daily?
That's a really good question. Once again, individual, based on, you know, body size, body weight, you know, if you're more muscular or not, physical activity, how much you sweat, all of that sort of thing. But blah, blah, blah. Well, it's so funny, actually, and sorry, I know we're running out of time. I just read something on a nutrition feed that I got today, that there are some experts in the States that recommend men drink 13.5 liters of water a day and women 11.5 liters of water a day. And I'm thinking, I just have to go around in a wheeled commode if that was the case. So to take it back to more kind of reasonable levels, I would say, generally speaking, and this can be increased or decreased depending on your own circumstances, about 8 cups of fluid a day. But to kind of expand on that, water is always ideal and is always the best and the most recommended, but it doesn't have to be our only beverage, obviously, and thank goodness. But our foods also contain sources of hydration, some more than others. So you don't, let's just say I did a calculation. I know you really well. I've done a really thorough assessment. And I say, Julie, you need 2,000 mils or 2 liters of fluid a day. I wouldn't be saying, Julie, go out and drink 6 cups of water, or go out and drink, or I mean, 8 cups of water or 8 cups of fluid, because part of Julie's diet would contain, hopefully, fruits and vegetables that have a very high water content. Yogurts, somebody had a yogurt question, sugar specific, but people eat yogurt. Yogurt can be 75 to 80% water. Canned fruit, soups, sauces, if we're treating ourselves to ice cream sometimes, like anything that melts at room temperature is providing us with fluid. So, you know, in a nutshell then, generally speaking, 8 cups, 2 liters, but knowing that other food sources are going to contribute to our fluid intake. And if you're not having bladder infections, if your skin is intact, if you're not trying to heal a wound, if you don't have diaphoresis or extreme swelling, if you don't have unusual losses like frequent loose stools, large outputs of urine, those are all good signs that you're well hydrated. If you pinch your skin and your skin bounces back, that's a good clinical or physical sign that you're hydrated. If you pinch your skin and it stays up for a bit and it takes a while to go down, that could be a sign that you don't have enough fluid. If your urine is dark color, strong smelling, that's a super duper sign that you need to increase your fluid intake. If you tend to feel like you're sunken around your temples, maybe have sunken sunken areas under your eye or dark, that can also be a reflection of your hydration status too. So that's answering the question and then building other stuff in and maybe putting people to sleep. I'm not sure. I apologize.
No, it's amazing information. And I know for myself, I don't always think to drink. So I've always got like a jug, you know, with me or beside me so that it reminds me, you know, every so often, take a sip, because it's hard sometimes to drink a lot of water in a day, right? So for me, I find that's what really helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And for those of you who don't like water, you know, flavoring water, like some of the sugar-free water drops, just a couple of drops, isn't going to be harmful. But if that's going to encourage you to drink water, give it a go for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it looks like that's it for the questions in the chat. Is there anyone else that had any questions that they just wanted to ask? No, I don't see any.
Hi.
Hi, go ahead.
Will apple cider vinegar and lemons, turmeric, things like that help in UTIs?
So is apple cider vinegar, lemons, and sorry, what was the third thing that you mentioned?
Turmeric, I think she
Turmeric.
said. Yeah.
So apple, I have never. Am I the only one getting that feedback?
No, I just heard that too.
Okay.
You sound okay now though, Chris.
Okay, thanks. So I've never heard of those things specifically helping with urinary tract infections. But I always say that just because I haven't heard of something or read recent research, it's not the case. So I could not see any harm in if you drink a lot of lemon water, you're helping with hydration. And if there's some research out there or people have had experience where they know that it's helped them, I don't see a drawback to that. Turmeric, that was one of the herbs and spices on our list that we went fairly quickly through on our grocery list. Turmeric, which is like curcumin, it's an herb spice that has been known to be anti-inflammatory. So there is a lot of research looking at that to decrease inflammation. Any type of an infection, urinary tract infection as well, always carries with it some kind of inflammation. But whether or not turmeric can actually help with urinary tract infections, I don't know. A lot of people now are supplementing with turmeric capsules. I don't know what the long-term goods and bads are of doing that, which is why, you know, I just keep saying, you know, try to incorporate food sources as much as we can to get these nutrients or elements. Apple cider vinegar, I've never heard of that from a urinary tract infection thing, but apple cider vinegar can help to decrease what we call the glycemic index of foods. And lower glycemic index is a good thing for many reasons, blood sugar control, weight management, and stuff like that. I don't know though how it would impact from a urinary tract infection perspective. I apologize.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
You're welcome.
Anyone
Flo.
else?
Hey Flo, this is Lubna. I am of Indian origin, so I eat a lot of turmeric in my everyday foods, but that hasn't really helped me with my UTIs. So yeah, do your research. But I think Chris did say that, you know, there is also experience-based information, right? So this is one of the things that I can share with you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think that there's so much opportunity for not only research, but for people like us to share experiences, because you know, we live the lived experience, and as long as we're sharing tips and tricks, that aren't harmful in any way, we can learn so much from each other. And it just motivates me to want me to know everything and to read every research article that's out there, or to start a research study on something if there's no evidence out there already.
Absolutely. And it's amazing what food can do, right, for your body.
Absolutely.
Okay, so just a couple of in the chat box, great information today. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, Chris.
Thanks, Paul.
I just want to thank you. This has been amazing. Nutrition is, you know, such a huge thing, and everyone loves food. I know even with COVID, it's always good to get a refresher of what the good foods are, and you know, especially what can help with bowels and everything. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I just want to do a final thank you to some of our sponsors. Our provincial partner, the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and Hollister, who's our provincial bowel and bladder, as well as vehicle modification sponsors, and also our regional sponsors, Westminster Foundation and Economic Insurance. So I think that's it, Chris, unless you had any final thoughts.
So just take care of yourselves in every way that you can. And if that means some comfort foods every now and then, that's part of self-care too. Thanks everybody for being here. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Chris. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Julie.